Now, President Cyril Ramaphosa will be sending an envoy to the United States as relations between the country and South Africa seems to be on shaky ground. But let's discuss it further. We're joined by Dr Kingsley Makhubela, who is an international relations expert and also a former diplomat. Dr. Makhubela, it's always a pleasure talking to you, getting your take on these issues. Would you agree with the ANC's chief whip that this is actually not about the Expropriation Act at all, but about the Israel-Hamas issue?
Good afternoon, Michelle. You know, my view is that the government has to take some control of communication on this matter. Because you're seeing all sorts of communication around this dispute with the United States across government structures. I've seen two premiers who have made comments on this matter. And this is a matter that has no concurrence function in terms of the local government or provincial government and national government. Foreign policy is the sole prerogative of the national government. So the government needs to come up with some control, Michelle. Having said that, there are two fundamental issues that I think the president would need to really manage and deal with them. One is a reference to bully, which in the State of the Nation, President Ramaphosa never said Trump is a bully, even though all of us are of the view that he was referring to him. I think he was quite circumspect in using the term. But it has been subsequently been taken over by events. A lot of people are making pronouncements. The second issue, Michelle, is a question of disinformation. Are we saying this is disinformation, as the chief whip is saying? It's a very, very serious thing if you say disinformation. There's a difference between disinformation and misinformation. Mm-hmm. Disinformation may mean that President Trump was given wrong information and he came to the conclusion based on wrong information. So people need to manage that. Now, when you send envoys, why are you sending envoys if you've made a conclusion that this is disinformation campaign or this is a bully campaign? So you've got to be very careful, and that will determine how this delegation will be received in Washington, because the embassy is definitely here, observing and collecting every information, feeding it into the United States. So it creates a bit of a problem for envoys who are going there.
Yeah. So we should have been circumspect, and the likes of Mdemiseni Ntuli should have also been circumspect. Is that what you're saying, Dr. Makhubela, that we shouldn't be making these willy-nilly statements as people who hold positions either in Parliament or in the municipality, in the executive?
Well, you know, you can't control what people in the opposition and ordinary people say, but people in power, people in government, they should be very careful now that the president has decided to send envoys. If, Michelle, I was sitting on the other side in Washington, I would say, why are you sending envoys when you've made a conclusion that this is a disinformation campaign we're running, we're bullying you? What are this envoy going to explain? Because you really cannot reverse those two concepts, disinformation and bullying. These are intentional things. How do you manage that? So they are making it very difficult for the president to send envoys. And remember, Michelle, an envoy essentially is an agent. It's a diplomatic agent. It's another synonym for diplomacy. So the diplomatic field is quite a tricky one, but it's part of the statecraft that must be managed with necessary circumspect and necessary care, because any wording that you put may change the meaning. And I'm just worried now, this delegation going, I don't know when are they going. The United States now, it's inundated with this summit or the upcoming summit between Donald Trump and Putin. And as we are talking, tomorrow, the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and Mike Waltz, the National Security Advisor, are in Saudi Arabia to make arrangements for the summit. So they will be inundated with those issues. And these are the key people on foreign policy issues. Who's going to do that? Who's going to meet with them? And they will probably meet junior staffers, I'm afraid.
I mean, in 2023, Dr. Makhubela, we also sent an envoy to the US about speculation about countries that were showing solidarity with the people of Gaza. Sidney Mufamadi was deployed at the time. Fast forward, just over a year later, we're sending a new delegation to the US. How do you think this is being viewed on the global stage?
My view, Michelle, is that the country must be very careful. We can't run foreign policy by sending envoys. There are speculations. I had the president address as the State of the Nation. He never mentioned what will be the specific mission of the envoys. Mm-hmm. He mentioned the challenges that we're facing. You know, subsequent to that, we've had Marco Rubio who said he's not coming to the G20 ministerial meeting. And he stated his reasons, which are embedded in the theme of the South Africa host of the G20. So there are people who are saying he's going to clarify the question of the G20. Other people are saying he's going to speak about the act that he just signed. Other people are saying he's going to explain the foreign policy. Foreign policy, you have an ambassador who runs the country there. And the other unfortunate thing, Michelle, is that I keep on seeing Rasul speaking to South African audience and using language that are not palatable with an accredited diplomat. He can't take the language and use the language that is used by head office because he's going to be isolated as an envoy. So there are very delicate issues of managing this thing. What the head office says and what he says, there must be a difference. And I think he should speak to the American audience, not to the South African audience. Shouldn't play to that. That he should leave to DECO to explain all these things and so on. So that's where the communication needs to be better nuanced and better managed. Because this envoy, I can tell you, under the circumstances, they are probably going to be snubbed. They will meet junior people in the Capitol Hill. They'll meet junior people at the State Department and junior people at the White House. They won't meet key decision makers, and that will be a problem. Of course, at the Capitol Hill, it will be good for them to meet the chairs, maybe people who are involved in the Foreign Relations Committee. But they're unlikely to do that if you keep on inflaming this thing when you want to pursue diplomacy. Remember, diplomacy is a total different statecraft. And really people sometimes want to use diplomacy to run internal political campaigns. You can't do that. Once you do that, you're going to create contradiction and really compromise your messaging at the diplomatic stage.
I mean, given what you've just said, Dr. Makhubela, I was going to ask you whether you thought it best. I mean, I don't know how these things work. I don't know how diplomatically how we would deal with this kind of level of misinformation, disinformation. But do you think that the president himself should go? And what you've just said about our envoys perhaps being received by junior staff, I suppose the answer is no.
Well, that's what is going to happen. That the president will likely seek an audience. He said that openly, that he will seek an audience with President Trump to clarify some of these issues. And if you look at the tonality of the president's statement, he speaks about clarification. You can't clarify. You can't go and clarify something to somebody who's embarking on disinformation. So that's why I'm saying there's nuancing in terms of the language that is being used. And I'm afraid we're taking this thing into the domestic issue, playing to the public anger and so, and sometimes rightfully so, the anger. But give the benefit of the doubt that President Trump has been given wrong information and he reached his conclusion on the basis of wrong information. That's why you're sending envoys to go and clarify this. But once you start saying this is disinformation that they are involved, it's a totally different ball game.
Right.
So there's no need to send envoy in that situation.
Right. Well, luckily we're journalists, so we can ask these kinds of questions. But do you think that US President Donald Trump cares about the facts of South Africa's Expropriation Act or our foreign policy or our domestic legislation?
You know, Michelle, I'm of the view that, the United States works on the basis of lobbies. It's a very strong system that is embedded both in Congress and the White House. People do lobby. I think people have lobbied for this position. And I think he made this pronouncement because unfortunately he runs his diplomacy on the microphone, and he made pronouncement without necessary detailed interrogation. I mean, he has the embassy here. They could have provided detailed information and so on. But it's on the basis of a lobby. I think there's a strong lobby that is trying to influence both sides of Pennsylvania Avenue to try to pump them with information that is not conducive for South Africa. Maybe because we've taken positions that are contradictory to Americans in certain instances. And rightfully so, because we are a sovereign state. So those are the tensions that are always there in diplomatic exercise or diplomatic practice, that you keep on getting tensions. But these tensions, there's a good terminology somebody coined called co-petition. You got to compete, but you got to cooperate with each other. And understanding that when you compete, it doesn't necessarily mean you can't cooperate with each other. So these are dynamics that ought to be managed at the international stage level. But I'm afraid, Michelle, if we take them to the internal politics, and the discord that I'm saying internally, even within government, that everyone makes pronouncement is going to create a serious problem for the president, because he won't be able to clarify some of these things that his people are saying within his own government.
In the midst of this, the lobby group AfriForum says that the fallout between the US and South Africa is in fact not due to misinformation, but is based on the facts. In fact, AfriForum will join the Solidarity Movement, sending its own delegation to the US to share their concerns about government laws and policies here in South Africa. It's going to be interesting how these two events then square off. The official government envoy going there to outline the Expropriation Act, to tell US lawmakers or whoever receives the envoys that constitutionally we cannot willy-nilly expropriate land without compensation. Perhaps we'll compare it to the US's own expropriation laws. And then on the side of that will be AfriForum and Solidarity saying that everything the US already thinks is happening in South Africa is true.
You know, Michelle, the lobby groups that are here, the AfriForum and so on, they definitely know the truth about the matter. And that's why you're seeing their main constituents, which are farmers, that they purport to be speaking on their behalf, are up in arms, because they know now if the United States goes further, because there are no sanctions now, if the United States goes further and impose tariffs because of these issues, because it seems it's a weapon of choice for Donald Trump, impose 25% tariffs, it's going to hit the farmers, it's going to hit their constituents. That's why they're standing up to say, listen, punish politicians, don't punish ordinary people. That's one issue. But the unfortunate thing that the United States would have to navigate is to run foreign policy and listening to different lobby groups and different institutions. That's why in the Vienna Convention, part of the tenet of the Vienna Convention is to establish diplomatic missions and to use the diplomatic channel to inform each other about anything, any dispute that may be there. So to really start relying on using non-governmental organizations to run foreign policy of countries, because the American may not agree with certain things, it will be unfortunate. It will change the scope of diplomacy. Because South Africa, if South Africa wants to understand anything in the US, would have to approach the US government and get to understand, get their position. But South Africa cannot formulate foreign policy based on different lobbies that are there in the US. Whatever views they are having about their own government, it will be unfortunate to do that.
And of course, we can't forget, you mentioned it just earlier, Dr. Makhubela, but the blow that this is to South Africa's G20 presidency, given the very strong statements made by the US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, while announcing that they would not attend this meeting of ministers. Let's not forget that South Africa is also meant to hand off the presidency to the US in November.
Absolutely. You know, I mean, if you look at the framing of the South African thematic approach, it's actually taken to a very large extent from the French Revolution, solidarity, and so on. Those are issues that are embedded in international relations, that we have to be in solidarity with each other. I mean, I don't understand why the Americans would oppose solidarity. I understand the question of equity, because they don't believe in equity. They believe in what they think is meritocracy. But how do you redress the past? They have used equity to address the past in the US for many years. We actually borrowed from them in terms of our own legislative framework to address the imbalances of the past. So all of a sudden, these things are not relevant. Maybe for now, they are no longer relevant, but they've been relevant for quite some time. So for the US to really say we're not going to attend because of these issues, equity, solidarity, and sustainability, what is the problem? Because they are opposed to the Paris process. And anything that speaks to sustainability, they link it to the Paris process. But diplomacy is all about accommodating each other and being able to differ with each other without really antagonizing each other. And that's this world, the new multipolarity that is emerging, that we need to live with each other. The United States, I'm afraid, Donald Trump particularly, he thinks it's 8 years ago when he was still in the White House. The world has changed fundamentally. There are new powers that have emerged on the global stage, and he must relate and deal with these new powers that have emerged.
Certainly an interesting 4 years ahead for all of us. Dr. Kingsley Makhubela, former diplomat and international relations expert, thanks for giving us your analysis of the situation.